All right, so let's keep talking about this idea of why learning about beer and continuing to talk about the barley. Your ingredients are incredibly important when you're making anything. Think about cooking from scratch. If you're making a cake or you're going to make a homemade pizza or I'm going to put some hamburgers on the grill and you're making the product from the different ingredients that you have available. That the quality of the ingredients influences the end product. So when we talk about plants and barley in this example, the environmental conditions influence how well that barley will grow. All right, so environmental conditions play a significant role in the barley yield. So I want you guys to think about this idea, the concept of climate change. As we see areas get inundated with rain, way more rain than they normally get, how would that impact the growth of the barley? If we see an area get a drought, look at what's going on out west in the southwest. Massive drought, long-term droughts, year after year after year, impacts the ability to grow these plants. So if your yield is smaller as a farmer, let's go into the business world, people. Smaller yield, does that influence the price? That price then trickles over into, well, if I'm a craft beer brewer and the price of my barley has gone up 30%, when I produce my beer, now I have to charge more for it to cover my costs. All these things are connected. That's the idea of relevancy. They're relevant, and then I want you guys to understand the connections between all of these things. Nothing stands alone and is isolated. So, all right, so as silly as it may sound, and as, well, who cares if, what's the big deal about the barley? Well, that could influence the price of the beer at the restaurant if there was a drought that messed up the barley production. So look at those connections. That's the goal with how this course is being taught, is understanding all these connections for people who are not going to be biologists. The connections are there, and I want you guys to see those. So, okay, so let's go back and let's take a look at this idea of malting. We start with those barley grains. That's the beginning part of this entire process. So when we have the barley grains, we get a little box, and we decide, okay, let's look at malting. Let me increase font size, make it a little easier on us. There we go. Okay, so malting. All right, start with the barley grains. And what we're going to do is we're going to soak the seeds. Now the water triggers germination. So there's a touchy balance here. We don't want the seed to actually germinate and start to grow into a new plant. Oops, that's bad. We want to trigger germination because then we can kind of break the seed coat and enzymes are going to be released. So what happens during this germination is the seed coat, what protects the seed. Let me draw this just so you guys have a better visual than my description. So inside the barley, you use your imagination, stretch it for me here. And I'm going to change color. All right, so this torpedo-like thing in the center here, that's actually supposed to be the embryo. That's the baby plant. I'm just going to put a little M. Let's see if I can write. It's not easy to write this way, sorry. Okay, so that little baby plant is in there. This is the seed coat. That seed coat's pretty hard. It's a protective casing to help protect the embryo. And then all the red is the food, carbohydrates. Sometimes there's proteins in there, but that's the food that's supposed to nourish the embryo. And it's all sitting dormant, just kind of hanging out, waiting for the right environmental conditions. Temperature, moisture, triggers germination. So what we're doing is just triggering germination by giving it the water, soaking it, obviously in a warm enough environment that it germinates, and then it says, okay, game on, time to start doing our thing. So you trigger the germination, and what's going to happen here is the embryo actually produces enzymes. Those are the enzymes that the beer brewer needs for mashing. Now, we allow this to move forward, slight germination, and then we say, stop, 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 stop your germination, and we're going to roast you. Okay? So it's a timing thing. There's a lot of critical science here. Time it. If it germinates too far, no good. Doesn't germinate enough, no good. So you have to pay attention to how long you're soaking it for those enzymes to be produced, and then to stop the germination process by roasting the seeds. Okay, so we're going to do this generally in a big vat. These big giant vats are going to be used for malting, and then what we'll do is we'll move those seeds into sometimes a secondary vat, and this is where the mashing can take place. So mashing. To do mashing, we now have that soaked barley. Oh. And the soaked barley is going to be mashed into something we call wort. So let me bold that, I'll underline it. All right, so that soaked barley gets mashed into wort. In order to do this, in order to make the wort, nope, I don't need all that. Get rid of that, get rid of that. And I'm just capitalizing wort to make it easier for you guys to, okay, important word, important thing to focus on. It's not capitalized when you spell it out. But to make the wort, what we're doing is going to cook in hot water that barley, that soaked barley. Cook in hot water. The enzymes that were produced earlier will convert the carbohydrates into simple carbs. Big fancy way of saying the embryo is digesting it. It's breaking it down. It's converting it into smaller and smaller simple sugars, simple carbohydrates. So you're cooking this stuff. Hops can be added. To produce specific flavors. All right, so we got our mashing going on here. Basically, we're cooking stuff down. We're cooking it to get this flavor, this big, don't tell my cousin I said this, but, or any craft brewer, but basically you're making a big barley soup here. But you want to be very specific. There's a lot of chemistry and a lot of important steps to pay attention to. Temperature regulation is critical. Cooking time is critical. Now, the great thing about commercial or larger breweries, it's all automated. My cousin, his operation is all automated. Literally a looks like a iPad screen that he pulls up and boop, 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 go. Shows the temperature of the vats, shows everything, and it's all a controlled system. Small scale stuff like the home brewer, what my cousin did when he started in his garage, you got a big, like a turkey fryer, and you're boiling this stuff. But that's how you learn. That's how he started, and how he learned was using a turkey fryer in his garage with his buddies, producing home brew. And then he just scaled it up to own a craft brewery. All right, so the hops though. Hops are a plant. So now we're taking another plant that was produced through photosynthesis, that was grown, and adding that in to enhance the flavors. It's like making spaghetti sauce and putting in your own oregano or pepper or basil or whatever you want to put in there. You're adding these ingredients together. So again, the quality of your ingredients influences the end product. So at the end of the game here, not the game, at the end of the day with mashing, and God, please don't tell any serious brewers, I'm just going to call it the barley soup that you've enhanced with the hops if you want that to produce your specific flavors. How much barley you use, which type of barley, all these things change the outcome of the, put the quotes, barley soup. And now you have wort. Okay, so I got 300, 500, 1,000 gallons of wort, whatever it may, whatever it may be that you're producing depending upon the size and the scale of your operation. Okay, hot stuff. Let's move it over to the third step here, fermenting. Now, fermenting involves our friend, the yeast. There are all sorts of different yeasts out there. You need to know what yeast is the appropriate yeast to use for the particular end product you're going for. There are all sorts of different brewers' yeasts. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is the most common one used in the brewing industry. And there are actually different variations of brewer's yeast. If you're making a certain type of beer, you change from this yeast to that yeast. If you're making wine, if you guys have ever made pizza dough from scratch or a loaf of bread and you take that little package of yeast, shake it up, those yeast cells are all sitting in a dormant state. And then you put them into, in this case, we're putting them into the barley soup. The yeast cells get warmed up, they get hydrated, and they come out of dormancy and they're like, let's go. This is great. This is the environment we like. All right, so fermenting, you're going to take your wort plus your yeast equals an active pathway. Now, an active pathway of energy production. Now, what yeast will do is if oxygen is available, the yeast is going to run this pathway of aerobic respiration. This is very bad if you're trying to brew beer or wine or any of this. You do not want aerobic respiration. So what we have to do with beer making or alcohol fermentation is create a sealed environment. This produces anaerobic conditions. Anaerobic means without oxygen. All right, so we'll talk about this in the third part, what anaerobic does and how this pathway works under anaerobic conditions.